Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the blistering heart of an ancient desert just as the sun starts cooking the stone courtyards and the horizon wobbles like jelly. The air tastes like warm chalk. Your sandals stick to the ground slightly, and yet right there, like an architectural hallucination, is a lush, blooming Persian garden. Trees bursting with figs and sour cherries, tiled fountains chuckling like they're in on some secret, and somewhere, always somewhere, the faint clink of a porcelain teacup. The whole place feels like it shouldn't exist. You probably won't survive this without a nap. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing all the corners of the world we're dozing off in together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the plateau, sweat dampening the back of your tunic lips cracked. The earth under your feet is baked to the consistency of overdone bread crust. And yet, as you crest a shallow rise, you spot something that defies the landscape, a burst of greenery fenced by sun-bleached adobe walls. Cypress trees rise like sentinels. Birds you haven't heard in hours suddenly chatter. You're looking at a Persian chaharbag, a garden so improbable in this arid plain, it's practically an insult to geography. And that's the point. Persian gardens weren't just pretty places to sit and sip. They were political statements, cooling sanctuaries, microclimates, carefully crafted microcosms of paradise built by people who clearly said, "Yeah, we see the desert, and no thanks." You duck under a trellised arch thick with grapevines and find instant shade. It's cooler. Not cool, but notably not roasting, which in desert terms is like entering a five-star resort. Historians still argue whether this effect was accidental or an early experiment in microclimate engineering. But knowing Persians, especially those with dynasties to impress and guests to outcharm it, probably wasn't random. The garden's layout grabs your attention. It's symmetrical. Too symmetrical. The channels bisect everything in fours. That's on purpose. The Four Gardens plan goes all the way back to the Achaemenids. Yes, the same empire that tried to steamroll the Greeks. One part water, one part shade, one part scent, and one part air. Symbolic, of course, but also incredibly functional. The earliest versions of these gardens date back over 2,500 years, and even by then, folks already had strong opinions about where to plant the pomegranate tree versus the jasmine. That attention to spatial balance wasn't just aesthetic, it was practical. Trees were staggered and layered to cast overlapping shade without hogging the water. Canopies funneled air. Ground cover kept the soil from turning into a skillet. You move toward a small octagonal fountain in the center. It's gurgling with clear water. The sound alone lowers your blood pressure. It's not a showpiece, it's a thermal regulator. Water in constant motion kept shallow to maximize surface area evaporates steadily. That's basic science. But placing it dead center in the quadrants, that's a Persian flex. You feel the drop in temperature near it, and it's delicious. There's a man trimming a myrtle bush nearby, wearing a loose robe and a focused expression. He glances up, nods, and returns to the plant. You have a suspicion he knows things about air currents that you, a humble wanderer, could never guess. His garden shears aren't flashy, but his technique is meticulous trimming, not just for shape, but to guide wind patterns. Here's the first fun fact you probably didn't expect: many Persian gardens were sunken. Yep, lower than the surrounding land. You wouldn't notice unless you walked the perimeter, but some had walls that weren't to keep people out. They were to block sand from drifting in and to keep the precious coolness from wafting away too quickly. Think of it like an enormous terracotta bowl of salad you don't want to dry out. And then there's the smell. You hadn't realized until now that your nose was bored. Mint rose, maybe basil, and something citrusy. It's like aromatherapy designed by someone with a PhD in breeze science. The scents don't just waft, they're strategically planted along breeze paths to refresh your senses before you even realize you're overheated. Of course, while all this might sound like luxurious landscape design, it was also insurance. When you live in a region where 45 C days are just called Tuesday, you take your cooling tech very seriously. These weren't just pleasure spaces. They were cooling engines, survival mechanisms disguised as elegance. But the real show, it happens when you sit. There's a worn stone bench beneath a sycamore tree, and you take your place on it. Suddenly you realize that the wind you didn't feel 10 steps ago is now brushing your cheek. It's subtle, just a hush, but it's real. That's not just luck. The entire garden is built to find the wind, tame it, slow it, and offer it to you like a waiter with a silver tray. You've just experienced early Persian environmental design at its finest. No fans, no compressors, just geometry, foliage, water, and patience, and one very sleepy gardener. You lean back slightly on that stone bench, lulled by the chirping of hidden birds and the faint burble of a distant water channel. But your eyes are drawn again to the trees. Something's off in a good way. They're too orderly. You squint. The pines are in rows. So are the fruit trees. And the shadows fall just so, overlapping perfectly to create a corridor of shade down the central walkway. It's as if the sun itself has been forced into submission by some ancient gardening committee. You're not wrong. The geometry of Persian gardens was no accident. These weren't your aunt's chaotic backyard jungle of herbs and hydrangeas. These were precision-engineered environments where each tree was measured, spaced, and aligned to work with its neighbors. If a breeze slipped through, it had to be guided. If shade fell, it had to fall exactly where it was needed. Think of it as chess played with cypress trees and apricot orchards. It starts with that classic chahar bag layout, a grid split into 4 quadrants by 2 perpendicular water channels. But inside each quadrant, more grids, more pathways, more ratios. A pomegranate tree isn't just beautiful, it's a cooling mechanism, a privacy screen, and let's be honest, a decent snack if you're stuck waiting for tea service. But it had to be planted far enough from a fig tree to avoid shading it out, yet close enough to contribute to the collective canopy. And don't even think about planting a plane tree near the citrus. Plane trees drop bark like confetti. Citrus trees are drama queens. Historians still argue whether these layouts followed strict manuals or evolved more organically, but many agree this wasn't gardening, it was environmental orchestration. You walk slowly through one of the diagonal garden paths, where the shade shifts with you like a well-trained servant holding a parasol. Above you, tall cypresses form a corridor of green. Beneath them, shorter trees, perhaps pomegranates or cherries, offer mid-level coverage. Near your feet, herbs and soft-leafed ground cover drink up the overflow of moisture from nearby irrigation channels. Each plant plays a role. It's a bit like a botanical symphony, bass notes from the tree's mezzo from the shrubs, and tiny aromatic high notes from the mint and basil dancing at ground level. The layering isn't just visual, it modifies the microclimate. Taller trees slow the wind, shorter plants cool the air, ground cover holds moisture. And as for the paths, pale stone chosen for its reflective properties. Even the floor of this place is built to fight heat. And here's your quirky tidbit for the evening: some garden designers used astrology to decide tree placement. Seriously. Not just this tree needs full sun, but Venus rules roses and Mercury is in Virgo, so plant basil near the eastern wall. This wasn't common, but in certain elite gardens, especially those belonging to mystics or philosophers, planting could follow celestial logic as well as agricultural. Now don't imagine every garden looked exactly the same. Regional adaptations mattered. In Isfahan, with its blazing summers and icy winters, trees needed to create both shade and insulation. In Shiraz, where the poets dreamed under orange blossoms, scent played a more central role. The geometry adapted, but the core principle remained. Nature should be trained, not fought, not ignored, but shaped with care. You pause beside a low wall topped with old sun-bleached tiles. On the other side is a miniature orchard so symmetrical it could make a modern city planner weep. And beside each tree, a gentle dip in the soil, barely noticeable unless you're staring. That's the catch basin shaped to direct runoff water from the pathways straight to the roots. It's basic hydrology, but elegant, silent. You might not even notice it until your feet accidentally dip into one. You're beginning to understand that this place isn't just pretty, it's precise. You wander past an open-air seating platform, the kind where a wealthy host might entertain under a canopy of vines. It's placed directly where three shade lines converge. The sun barely touches it, even at noon. And just past it, a stand of slender trees, placed so that air is channeled into a soft breeze corridor, naturally funneling airflow without a single mechanical tool. It's cooling physics in sandals. Of course, not everyone appreciated the rigidity of garden geometry. Some mystics and philosophers pushed back, arguing that over-controlling nature was a little arrogant. But even they planted in patterns just messier ones. Maybe with more winding paths, more hidden alcoves. A garden meant not just to cool your tea, but to help you lose yourself on the way to it. You think again of the symmetry. The way your footsteps echo evenly as you walk. The way the branches overhead form mirrored arches. You get the sense this place wasn't meant to be rushed through. It's a place to sit, to breathe, to hear your own heartbeat slow. And sure enough, you come across another bench, this one carved from some reddish stone, warm to the touch. You sit, and as you do, the breeze stirs again. Different angle this time. It curls over your shoulders like an old friend. Your hair shifts slightly. You glance up, and yes, right above, a vine-laden trellis sways just a bit, offering dapples of sunlight through green leaves. It all seems effortless, which is exactly the trick. You swing your feet off the bench and stand slowly, as if the garden itself doesn't want to let you go. You follow the low-tiled channel that runs through the gravel path, curving gently past a patch of marigolds and into a shaded alcove. But now you're hearing something more subtle than birdsong or breeze, the faint, constant trickle of running water. Not the surface water from the fountains or pools. This sound is deeper, quieter, cooler. It seems to hum from beneath the earth itself, and that's because it does. You're standing atop one of ancient Persia's most quietly brilliant innovations, the Qanat system. A subterranean miracle of gravity-fed irrigation, carved meticulously through rock and earth centuries before the Roman aqueducts ever dribbled their first drop. You look down at the dusty tiles beneath your feet and realize you're not just walking on a path, you're walking on a pipeway. Somewhere beneath you, cold mountain water is gliding silently toward the garden's heart, hidden from the sun and protected from evaporation. It's like a secret river designed by introverts. The Qanat is a simple idea: dig a horizontal tunnel from a high mountain aquifer and let gravity do its thing. But the execution, infuriatingly complex. Imagine calculating the precise slope needed to move water gently downhill without letting it rush or stagnate. No pumps, no pressure valves, just physics patience and very tired men with pickaxes. Historians still argue whether the idea for qanats originated independently in Persia or were borrowed from earlier Mesopotamian systems and simply refined. Either way, Persia's engineers elevated the concept into a nationwide infrastructure centuries before the word infrastructure even existed. You reach a small domed structure in the center of the garden. It looks like a decorative stone gazebo until you realize it's a qanat wellhead disguised to blend in. Peer down and you see a black, glimmering void, cool air brushing your face as it rises from below. That's right. The water's cold, mountain cold. It might have started its journey miles away days ago, trickling through the underground veins of the desert. And now it's here at your toes, ready to be piped, pooled, or turned into tea. And here's the fringe detail you won't find in school books. In some rural villages, they used to whisper that the qanat water had a spirit, a sort of guardian wind that traveled with it, keeping it pure. Children were told not to throw rocks into the shafts, lest they wake the water's breath and anger it. Superstition, maybe. But when you lean in and feel that air cool, moist, like the sigh of a sleeping earth, it's not hard to understand why they felt something alive lived down there. Now the garden makes even more sense. It's not just pretty and practical, it's powered from below. Those fountains and pools aren't fed by surface wells. They're connected directly to a regulated system that distributes water just enough exactly where needed, with none wasted. In a world where rainfall can be cruelly absent for years, that's not luxury. That's survival. But more than that, it's stealth luxury. The real flex wasn't showing off how much water you had. It was showing how little you needed to use. The garden stays cool not by flooding it, but by understanding how to whisper to the earth. Move the water quietly. Let it seep in under the roots. Let the wind finish the job. You move to a narrow marble path that bridges one of the surface pools. Below the ripples, faint lines shimmer in the water tile mosaics depicting stylized vines and birds. Their colors, indigo, turquoise, saffron, have barely faded thanks to the constant touch of the water. On a hot day like this, the water's surface isn't just reflective, it's active. It pulls heat from the air. The evaporation over the surface subtly cools the surrounding area, especially when paired with moving air. Which brings us to another subtle genius move pairing qanats with airflow structures, which we'll get to soon. For now, understand this: the cool air rising from those subterranean tunnels isn't just a side effect, it's usable. It's directed through narrow channels into tea houses, rest pavilions, and shaded seating areas. In places like Yazd, they even built subterranean living rooms to trap that coolness, an ancient version of air-conditioned basements sans electricity. And yes, before you ask, some of those tunnels are still in use today. You trail your hand through the water in a shallow basin, the kind used to slow and filter the incoming qanat stream before it enters the garden's upper fountains. The water's not icy, but it's certainly chillier than the air. A gardener might dip clay jugs into it and carry them still beaded with condensation to a shaded nook where tea is steeped slowly and patiently. You imagine a small copper kettle on a brazier, steam rising gently, the heat of the tea offset by the cool bench beneath you and the fresh wind kissing your cheek. Here's a quiet moment of magic. The tea isn't cooled by the wind alone. It's cooled by everything: the air shaped by tree placement, the underground water silently radiating cold, and the clever geometry of the space funneling all that delicious comfort directly to your sitting spot. Nothing here is wasted, not even a puff of breeze. You look up at the garden around you, still serene, still thriving. And beneath it all, unseen but essential, the qanats wind like veins through the desert, keeping everything alive. You wonder how many hands shaped this, how many diggers, surveyors, masons. How many quietly genius minds solved the physics of earth and water centuries before anyone thought to refrigerate a single drop? You leave the wellhead behind, stepping lightly across sun-warmed tiles toward a shaded structure nestled at the end of the garden. Its walls are thick, its silhouette elegant, and the roof slopes gently inward as if it's bowing politely to the sky. From a distance, it looks like a refined summer pavilion, but as you draw closer, a new sound greets you air. Not just wind, but something engineered. A low, hollow whisper that seems to come from every direction at once. You pass beneath the archway, and suddenly, coolness. Like walking into an invisible pool of shade and quiet. This, you realize, is not merely a pavilion. It's a tea house, but one built with the principles of ancient passive climate control. A room designed for wind, and it works. You feel it immediately. The still air outside has been coaxed into motion in here, where it snakes along corridors, swirls through open latticework, dips beneath eaves, and grazes your skin with just enough chill to make you pause. You sit cross-legged on a cushioned platform low to the ground and perfectly placed within one of the garden's cardinal lines. From here, you can see straight down a corridor of trees past a fountain to a small window punched high in a mud brick wall. That's no accident. That window is a calculated invitation to the wind. You're starting to suspect these ancient architects thought about airflow the way chefs think about seasoning. Add too much, overwhelming. Add too little, flat. But just the right amount, delivered at just the right moment, from just the right direction. And suddenly, everything's balanced. That brings us to the architecture trick, the multiple entry pavilion. At first glance, it just seems like a shady place with a nice breeze. But the more you look, the more you see that its open sides are angled. Not just square gaps, but intentionally skewed to catch prevailing winds. The walls inside are often curved or softened, not for decoration, but to redirect airflow like musical notes bouncing off well-tuned acoustics. Historians still argue whether the Persians used formal wind maps or simply relied on years of observation and intuition to place openings. Either way, the results speak for themselves. You're not just in a breeze, you're in a curated airflow experience where hot air is pushed up and away, and cool air is drawn low and around your tired ankles. You reach for a ceramic cup of tea that's been left on a nearby tray. It's not cold. Persians weren't fans of iced drinks. But the moment you lift it to your lips, you realize your face is perfectly framed between two intersecting currents of air. The cup steams, but you don't sweat. The room isn't refrigerated. It's responsive. This might be a good time to introduce the term badgear or wind catcher. But don't worry, we'll go deep on those soon. For now, this pavilion is your crash course in early passive cooling. These kinds of structures weren't just for tea. They were used for sleeping, thinking, gossiping, dreaming. Summer rooms, winter rooms, domed skylights for airflow, even underfloor vents connected to qanats. Some wealthy homes had entire wings designed purely around what the wind was doing that month. Quirky historical tidbit for this chapter. Some tea pavilions were designed to hum. No, really. When the wind passed through certain combinations of openings, particularly in structures with wooden lattice screens or ceramic flutes, it created harmonic vibrations. Imagine sipping tea while your walls quietly sang. A wind chime you could live inside. And in the center of this tea house always is the samovar or kettle brazier, standing like a respectful contradiction, a source of heat inside a space designed to defeat it. You watch a servant pour tea with a practiced tilt, the liquid a dark amber ribbon into a delicate cup. The tea itself is strong black, likely spiced. The sugar's served separately. You take a sip. It's hot, yes, but your body doesn't rebel. Why? Because everything around you, the walls, the trees, the wind, have taken the edge off the heat. You're safe here, swaddled by shade and science. Here's a lesser-known flourish. Some of these pavilions had cooling floors. Not mechanically cooled, but cleverly ventilated. Underneath the platform you're sitting on might be a shallow, concealed channel drawing air from a qanat. As the cold air flows beneath the floor, it cools the surface. Clay tiles or smooth stone absorb that cold and release it gradually, like a silent stone-bound refrigerator. And again, all of this, every angle, every gap, every ceiling fanless flutter, happens with zero electricity. Just the patient manipulation of air-brick water and time. You look around. There's no single source of wind. Instead, the breeze happens to you. It arrives like a courteous guest, never barging in, always present. And you begin to understand what Persian engineers meant when they wrote of teaching the wind. They didn't force it. They invited it, trained it, coaxed it into habits and pathways. Like a cat you can't pick up, but who will gladly curl in your lap if you just sit still long enough. A child runs past the pavilion giggling, chasing a spinning copper pinwheel that glints in the light. You watch as the breeze nudges it again, and it spins with cheerful abandon. Just one more little device dancing to an ancient rhythm. You sip your tea again, still hot. But you're not. And that you realize is the true brilliance of this place. You step back out of the tea pavilion, reluctantly leaving its swirls of breeze and quiet hum behind. The sun is still glaring, the sky still dry as a bread oven, but something's shifted. You've tuned in. Now you're noticing details you missed, before subtle shifts in temperature, the way air seems to move differently from one side of the garden to the other. You raise your eyes and see them. Towers, not minarets, not watchtowers. These are blocky geometric structures poking up from rooftops like odd little chimneys, square or octagonal, often crowned with decorative slats or vented brickwork. They are called badgers or wind catchers, and they are the unsung heroes of Persian desert life. You've seen ancient air conditioning. Now you're meeting the control tower. At first glance, a badger just looks like a fancy tower that got confused about its job. But look closer, and you realize it's a functional sculpture. Each face of the tower has openings, some wide, some narrow, angled precisely to catch passing winds, even the faintest whisper, and funnel them downward into the building below. You approach a courtyard villa built with classic desert smarts, thick adobe walls, a central fountain, and there it is, a tall badger perched above the house like a silent conductor. You watch as the wind slips into the openings at the top, cools as it travels down a shaft lined with clay or tile, and spills into the rooms below like breath exhaled after a sip of mint tea. Historians still argue whether the badger was invented in Persia or borrowed and perfected from earlier Egyptian or Mesopotamian prototypes. What isn't debated? The Persians made them an art. Some towns like Yazd became windcatcher cities, their skylines bristling with hundreds of these towers, each tuned to different wind angles, like flutes in a desert orchestra. Here's a quirky engineering tidbit. The badger doesn't just catch wind, it can also expel it. On still days when the air inside a home is warmer than the air outside, the heat rises naturally. The badger works like a siphon, pulling hot air up and out through convection. Some towers were even dual purpose, with internal flues divided by wooden panels, catching wind from one side, venting from another. Reversible, passive, and smart. It's like your attic fan's older, cooler cousin. You step inside a room beneath a particularly grand wind catcher. The walls are bare, but beautiful plaster over adobe faintly curved in the corners to soften airflow. You feel the breeze arriving not as a gust, but as a steady draw. It creeps along the walls, slips across the floor, and disappears again into another opening. And then when you least expect it, another current cooler brushing the back of your neck. You've never felt air this thoughtful before. In more elaborate homes, badgers were sometimes paired with shallow pools or ceramic jars filled with water placed directly beneath the vertical shafts. As the wind passed over or through the water, it cooled further through evaporative cooling, a process so gentle it barely feels like science. But it is. You're inside a natural air chiller one that also happens to smell faintly of rosewater and plaster. Some scholars have suggested that Persian engineers even experimented with Venturi effects, using narrowing shafts to increase the speed and cooling of air the way modern engines do. Others say it was all trial and error refined over generations. But here's the thing, whether it was intuitive genius or studied engineering, the results speak for themselves. These towers worked, still do actually. In some places, they're being revived as sustainable alternatives to energy-hungry cooling systems. You walk slowly through the space, ducking your head into one of the air channels. A trickle of wind greets you, whispering secrets from the rooftops. The breeze brings not just relief, but a faint sense of history of grandmothers brewing tea, children sleeping through summer afternoons, scholars tracing poetry into damp clay with fingers cooled by ancient air. And here's your fringe fact for this round. In some royal residences, badgers were decorated with colored glass or lattice work that tinted the incoming air. Not enough to paint the wind blue or anything, but enough to soften the light, creating rippling patterns on the stone floors, turning heat into theater. Imagine lying half asleep beneath a ceiling, while golden rectangles of cooled sunlight drift silently over your legs. You pass through a hallway where a wind catcher shaft has been sealed, too damaged to use. The air is immediately heavier. Still, you feel a sudden spike of heat, as if the room has been holding its breath. Then you step into the next chamber where the airflow returns, and it's like diving back into water after standing too long on a hot rock. That's the difference. Persian wind engineering doesn't eliminate the heat. It mediates it. It negotiates tempers, whispers it into submission. And the genius of the wind catcher isn't just in its mechanics, it's in its humility. It doesn't fight the desert. It listens to it, reads its cues, learns when to step aside. You walk back into the sunlight, blinking. Overhead, another tower tilts slightly to the west, catching the late afternoon breeze just as it begins to shift. And somewhere inside the building below, a cool draft has already begun winding down stairwells and into teacups. The wind has been trained. You wander deeper into the garden, the stone path bending gently between rose beds and towering cypresses. Somewhere nearby, you hear the soft splash of water on water. Not the gurgle of a fountain this time, but a slower, more languid rhythm. You follow the sound and find it a shallow, rectangular pool stretching across a quiet courtyard, its surface unbroken except for a few ripples stirred by the wind. At first, it just seems like a pretty detail, another place for reflection. But then you feel it. As the wind glides across the water, it lifts just a whisper of coolness into the air. Not a gust, not even a breeze. More like the delicate sigh of a wet cloth held against your forehead. Subtle but unmistakable. And that's when it clicks. This pool isn't ornamental, it's functional. You've just stumbled into one of the oldest tricks in Persian thermal engineering, evaporative cooling. The concept's simple. When water evaporates, it takes a little heat with it. And in dry desert air, water loves to evaporate. So the more surface area you expose to the wind, the more the air gives up its heat in exchange for moisture. The result, a space that feels just a bit more breathable. And that tiny change, 2 or 3 degrees maybe, is the difference between heat stroke and afternoon nap. You sit beside the pool, watching the way light dances across the bottom. The water is barely ankle deep, wide but shallow. That's no accident. The depth is precisely calibrated to maximize surface exposure, speeding up evaporation without wasting water. And placed exactly where the wind passes most reliably through the courtyard, of course. You're starting to see it now. Every brick, every bush, every breeze, it's all part of a larger design. Historians still debate whether Persian architects learned this from observing natural oases or through careful experimentation over generations. Either way, the result is the same: a garden that doesn't just survive the heat, it uses it. You dip your hand into the water. It's not cold, but it feels cold because of what surrounds it. The shaded overhangs, the circulating air, the slow-moving current that prevents stagnation and keeps the surface fresh. It's as if the garden itself is exhaling, and you're sitting in its breath. Here's your quirky detail for today. In some older gardens, they floated thin clay tiles or hollow ceramic spheres in the water. Not for art, though they looked beautiful, but to help regulate evaporation and control the rate of cooling. Too fast and you lose moisture. Too slow and the air stays hot. These people weren't just building gardens. They were conducting climate choreography. You rise and walk along the edge of the pool, past a row of niches built into a wall. Inside one, you spot a jar, long-necked, glazed, and slightly damp to the touch. It's a zir, or a clay pot, designed to cool its contents using evaporation. The porous surface lets moisture seep through slowly, and as it evaporates, it draws heat from the contents inside. You knock gently, and the hollow tone rings with surprising coolness. That's right. Even their pitchers had air conditioning. Some of these jars were kept in pairs. One for storage, one buried slightly in the earth for extra chill. Tea water might be drawn from a quana and cooled in a zir before being heated again over charcoal. A wonderfully inefficient cycle, but one that made sense when each step was measured, deliberate, and dictated by the sun's position and the garden's mood. You step back into the pathway and spot another clever arrangement, a wind corridor lined on one side by tall reeds and on the other by a narrow strip of running water. The wind passes through the reeds, slows slightly, and cools as it skims the water. By the time it reaches you, standing just off to the side, it's become a gentle, humidified breeze. Not enough to ruffle your tunic, but enough to remind your skin that you're not alone in this dry heat. And this was no accident. Persian architects and gardeners collaborated often obsessively on the placement of water features. They knew that a large pool in the center of a garden would look grand, but a narrow channel winding through the trees and shaded by vines might feel grander in the middle of the day. In wealthier homes, evaporative cooling wasn't just for gardens. It was built into the house itself. Walls might be thick and windowless on the sun-facing sides, but inside, clever vents funneled air over small indoor pools, carrying coolness into private rooms. Some homes even had multi-level fountains designed to trickle water slowly through shaded courtyards, each level capturing the breeze at just the right moment to cool the air. You sit again this time beneath a canopy of grapevines, where the air smells faintly of dust and summer fruit. A server passes balancing a wide tray with a kettle cups and a small bowl of sugar cubes flavored with cardamom. The tea is steaming, and yet you feel completely comfortable. Why? Because the air is working with the tea. The breeze doesn't fight the heat, it frames it. The garden doesn't hide from the sun, it manages it. And the water, silent, still patient, isn't just for drinking. It's cooling you right now without touching you, without asking for thanks. You think for a moment how little of this required force. No machines, no wires, just air guided by purpose. Water shaped by habit, stone shaped by hand, and a few well-placed vines. The sun has climbed higher now, but you hardly notice. You're moving deeper into the shaded zones where the trees thicken and the breeze becomes part of your breath. You step through another low archway and enter a small enclosed garden within the larger one. This is a more intimate space, less ceremonial, more human. And in the middle of it, a tea set awaits. On a low table draped with faded cloth, there's a copper kettle still hissing over a charcoal burner. A bowl of dried fruits, figs, golden raisins, slices of tart quince sits nearby. The tea itself is strong, nearly black, poured into tiny glass cups with a curl of steam rising from each. You lift one carefully. The heat of it meets your lips, but your skin stays cool. Not just because of the breeze or the water. You glance around. This small tea house has no doors. Its walls curve gently into open archways, and every angle, every line seems designed to let air linger here. The very architecture is part of the tea ritual. This is what they meant by training the wind. The room is a cup, and the wind is what it carries. You settle into a cushioned sip your tea and let your eyes adjust. The floor is tiled with geometric mosaics in cool tones. Lapis, turquoise, dusty green. Every pattern seems to spiral inward, and the air carries the faintest scent of brewed herbs, baked bricks, and citrus leaves warmed by the sun. Tea here isn't just a beverage, it's part of the thermal equation. Historically, Persian tea wasn't just consumed, it was served into environments. You don't just boil water and pour. You choose a time when the wind will be at the right angle. You seat guests where cross currents will pass gently behind their necks. The tea is steeped slowly, often with a samovar designed not to boil aggressively, but to simmer endlessly, like a pot holding the afternoon still. One quirky historical note: some aristocratic tea rooms were designed to intensify the steam's appearance. They'd paint walls in darker shades, or arrange seating so that afternoon sun struck the teacups at an angle, highlighting the wisps of rising vapor. It wasn't about temperature, it was about theater. The illusion of contrast, hot drink, cool space. The garden handles that part. You sip again. The bitterness of the tea is offset by the cooling air that moves past you, almost as if the tea isn't meant to refresh you directly, but to awaken your senses so the garden can finish the job. You chew a bit of dried fig, its sticky, sweet grounding perfect. And then the breeze carries in another scent, jasmine, drifting from the edge of the enclosure. You close your eyes for a moment. The hum of the wind, the smell of scorched clay and tea leaves, the faint splash of water in the distance. It all starts to feel like a single, continuous movement, a kind of desert lullaby. And you understand that this wasn't just clever design, it was philosophy. A belief that comfort comes not from one thing, but from balance between many hot and cool, sun and shadow, motion and stillness. You stand slowly, carrying your cup with you to a narrow corridor lined with mashrabia screens, wooden latticework that filters sunlight into lacy shadows on the floor. Through the gaps, you see another courtyard beyond this one, filled with blooming orange trees. In the center, a circular house, a small reflective pool designed to mirror the sky above. Historians still argue whether these tea spaces were purely functional or spiritual. Some say the act of drinking tea in such harmony with environment was a quiet act of devotion. Others call it just good taste. Both could be true. And here's something delightfully fringe. There are manuscripts that describe wind-trained courtesies, etiquette for how hosts were expected to seat their guests according to airflow. The most honored guest didn't just get the prettiest chair, they got the best angle for breeze and light. Imagine showing hospitality by arranging air itself. You run your fingers along the mashrabia, feeling the warmth of the wood. Beyond it, the scent of orange blossoms deepens. You move toward it, and the corridor becomes an evaporative passage, deliberately narrow to compress and accelerate the breeze as it flows through. As you exit the tunnel, you feel it again, that distinct moment where wind and space meet perfectly. Your skin lifts slightly. The tea in your hand, still warm, sends out a curl of steam that rises and disappears with ease. You are part of the ritual now. And somewhere, though you can't see it, the qanat flows silently beneath your feet. Water shaped the tea shaped the room shaped the wind, and the wind somehow is shaping you. This isn't refreshment, it's orchestration. You move beneath the orange trees now, your footsteps muffled by dry soil and wind-blown petals. The light here is different, dappled, fractured by the thick canopy overhead, as though the sun has been put through a citrus-scented colander. The breeze, too, has softened. It no longer rushes, it meanders. You inhale, and the air tastes faintly of blossom and rind. This is not just a grove, it's a living corridor of cool. The further in you walk, the more you realize the grove isn't laid out randomly. The trees are arranged to create microclimates, little pockets of controlled shade and airflow between trunks and branches. Taller citrus trees rise in regular rows, their branches carefully pruned to let in just the right amount of light. Below them, shorter shrubs, perhaps basil or rue or nasturtium, form a lower tier of green insulation. Together they create a tiered system where every layer does a job: shade, scent, moisture, motion. And beneath it all, a small channel of moving water, barely wide enough to splash in, winding like a lazy snake across the path. It's clear, slow, and shallow, and absolutely crucial. The air that passes over this narrow stream, even more than the still basins or large pools, becomes a courier of coolness. You crouch to touch it. The water is surprisingly crisp. Not because it's shaded, though it is, but because it was brought here underground via qanat and only surfaced just a few feet back. It hasn't had time to heat up yet. It's fresh from the mountain's memory. Here's your curious nugget for this section. In some Persian gardens, gardeners would deliberately roughen the sides of water channels with textured stonework, not to be artsy, but to maximize surface area and increase evaporation. The more angles water could touch air, the more it cooled, function masquerading as decoration. You follow the channel to a small opening in a low stone wall, just large enough for a child, or say a stray breeze to pass through. The water vanishes into the gap. But beside it, there's something even more intriguing, a stone vent cleverly disguised as a decorative niche. You lean close. Air is flowing through it, cool air laced with the scent of moist earth. It's connected to a qanat access shaft, repurposed not for irrigation, but for climate control. That's right. Even the ventilation system has been drafted into the campaign against heat. The wind here isn't just a guest, it's on a schedule. Afternoon breezes come from the west, filtered through layers of trees across shallow water, past ceramic jars set to sweat just enough, and through chambers tuned to catch and guide every puff, like a maestro in a linen robe. Some historians believe these orange groves were used not just for cooling, but for meditation. The sensory layering shade breeze scent trickling water acted as a physical lullaby. You don't just breathe more easily here, you think more slowly. You forget to check the sky for clouds. You start to wonder whether you've stepped outside of time entirely. And here's where things get a little poetic. According to some old Persian poems and garden treatises, the orange grove was considered a conversation chamber. Not in the way we use sitting room, but literally a space where the wind and the leaves speak to one another and the soul eavesdrops. Philosophical, sure. Pretentious, maybe. But then again, you're here now, listening. And yes, something's definitely speaking. You pause beside a low platform set with cushions and a bowl of candied citron peel, bright sticky slivers of citrus preserved in syrup and dried in the shade. You pick one up. It's still fragrant. Sweet, yes, but not cloying. The perfect companion for bitter tea and a warm breeze. And here's a fringe flourish that only a garden obsessed with thermodynamics would even consider. The peel isn't just for taste. Candied or dried citrus peels, when set in shallow bowls around a courtyard, release oils into the air. Natural air fresheners carried by wind designed to mask the smell of warm stone soil or, well, people. You've just been aromatically tricked into thinking the air is cleaner. And honestly, you're not mad about it. A gardener passes in the distance holding a woven basket filled with pruned branches. He disappears down a winding path, and for a moment, you're alone again. The breeze picks up slightly, and you watch as a line of hanging citrus leaves begins to sway in perfect rhythm. The channel bubbles softly. Somewhere above you, a bird shifts in the branches. Everything is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. You rise again, brushing crumbs of candied peel from your hands, and continue down the path. The air changes with you. A little warmer, a little drier. The garden is letting you go gently but deliberately. It's trained the wind to cool your tea and cradle your rest. But now it's turning your face gently back toward the sun. You are not the first to walk this path. You won't be the last. But for a moment in this tiny grove where air and orange and earth all meet, you feel like the wind is yours alone. You step from the citrus grove into a more formal part of the garden. Now stone paths underfoot tall cypresses arranged like green pillars on either side, framing the space with almost ceremonial precision. The air here is cooler than it has any right to be considering the sun overhead. And then you see it, the heart of the estate. A grand summer pavilion 2 stories high, gleaming with tile work and shaded by a deep overhanging roof. But your eye isn't drawn to the columns or the marble or even the elegant wooden screens. It's pulled upward to the tower rising from the roof. A massive badger, the tallest you've seen so far. Its fluted sides are carved with geometric precision, its openings on every face catching the wind no matter the direction. It looms like a cathedral organ, except instead of sound, it channels air. You walk slowly up the steps and into the pavilion. The floor is smooth stone worn cool by centuries of bare feet and summer breezes. Above you, high in the vaulted ceiling, you can see the vertical shaft of the wind catcher plunging deep into the house like a cold finger pointing at the earth's core. You're inside one of Persia's greatest tricks, the summer room, also known as a sardab, literally cold house. And it lives up to the name. The air in here is at least 10 degrees cooler than outside, maybe more. But there's no mechanical noise, no buzzing, no humming. Just the whisper of wind and the faint chime of a metal tea strainer swaying on a hook. You move to the side wall where a connaught cooling shaft meets the wind channel. The underground water, cold from its long journey, meets the descending air in this chamber. The two elements marry, creating a breeze that feels like it came from a glacier rather than a desert. Historians still argue whether this pairing of connaughts and badgers was accidental brilliance or deliberate innovation. It seems almost unfair air conditioning with no electricity hundreds of years before anyone ever said BTU. A fringe detail to enjoy some of these sardabs had hollow floors laid with ceramic grills that allowed the cooled air to seep upward, gently creating an invisible river of chill just above the surface. Sit low on cushions or woven mats, and you were perfectly placed in the current's path. This wasn't just luxury. It was an act of thermal choreography. You take a seat at a carved wooden bench nestled against a niche in the wall. A shallow bowl of rosewater sits nearby, not to drink, but to scent the air. Sometimes these rooms would have perfumed basins where water infused with saffron or jasmine would slowly evaporate, marrying fragrance to breeze in an experience that makes modern scented candles feel like amateur hour. This room wasn't just for cooling off. It was where people gathered to think, to write letters, to solve family problems, to sip tea and slowly, over the course of hours, reach the conclusion that maybe everything would be okay. Not because someone fixed it, but because the wind came back, and it always came back. You notice the layout again. The room is square or nearly so, but the corners are softly curved. The ceilings don't just rise, they swoop, coaxing the air upward rather than trapping it. Every angle invites movement. Every gap allows for pause. The architecture isn't just cooling you, it's calming you. Now take this quirky tidbit with a grain of salt, but in some travelers' journals from the 17th century, guests claimed the summer pavilions were so comfortable they made hot tea feel like cold water. That's probably a little exaggerated, but when you sip your tea, now still warm, still aromatic, it doesn't jar you the way it might under the open sun. You don't sweat. You don't squint. You simply sip and feel the breath of the wind sigh against your cheek. It's here in this room that you start to understand something deeper. The Persians didn't dominate their environment. They danced with it. They trained the wind, yes, but only in the way you train a cat, by offering the right places to curl up and nap. They didn't build barriers to the sun. They planted vines and wrote poems about shadows. They didn't silence the water. They arranged it so it could whisper. And when it came to heat, they didn't fear it. They just made friends with the breeze. You lean back against the wall. Above you, the badger catches another puff of wind. You hear it descend with a low whoosh that seems to gather in your ears like the ocean in a shell. The breeze arrives in your lap, cool and steady, and disappears behind you like a secret. The tea is gone, but the comfort lingers. You could sleep here. In fact, that's what people often did. Napped in the middle of the day in a room cooled by logic, poetry, and bricks. It didn't matter how hot it got. The sardab remembered how to breathe, and so do you. You leave the summer room with a small sigh, stepping back into the open courtyard, like someone rising slowly from a bath. The air outside doesn't feel oppressive, now it feels honest. Sunlight washes over the paving stones, warm enough to sting but softened by the memory of shade. You follow the narrow path leading away from the main pavilion past a fig tree with its leaves spread like green hands, and through a side gate that opens into what looks at first like a service lane. But there's more here than meets the eye. This is the functional spine of the garden, the backstage area where much of the environmental magic was maintained. You pass rows of tall clay jars stored in the shade, their surfaces streaked with mineral lines from years of slow evaporation. Some are filled with water, others with stored tea leaves, still others perhaps with fruit or rice. But it's not the jars that grab your attention, it's the walls. They aren't straight. They curve slightly, almost imperceptibly, guiding both wind and people through this narrow zone. The breeze, compressed by the tighter space, moves faster here, cooler. This is what Persian gardeners sometimes referred to as a wind channel, a path that wasn't just built for walking, but for accelerating air. You glance up and see slits in the roof gaps designed not to let in sun, but to let hot air out. Like chimneys flipped upside down, they pull warmth up while guiding breeze downward. A centuries-old ventilation trick now found in 1,000 corporate lobbies pretending to be eco-conscious. Here's a fringe architectural flourish. Some estates added acoustic stones to these corridors. Tiny carved features that created soft humming sounds when the wind passed through, audible indicators that the air was moving properly. If the corridor fell silent, something was wrong. The system was out of tune. You follow the corridor's curve, stepping lightly around a lizard sunning itself, and arrive at a modest door. Inside is a smaller structure, bare, clean, cool. A kitchen house, but not the sweaty, smoky kind you might expect. Instead, this is a place where tea was assembled, cooled, and steeped slowly in lidded ceramic pots. And once again, the wind is here too. A tall vented shaft rises from the corner, connected to a side wall that's open only at the top. The breeze flows in from high cools as it sinks and gently dries the air near the tea. You realize they weren't just making tea, they were conditioning it, giving the herbs time to expand, letting temperature and humidity mix just so. Historians still argue whether these tea kitchens were entirely separate from cooking spaces or if this was a later luxury. Some think they were innovations of wealthy homes. Others suggest smaller homes used the same tricks, just scaled down. Either way, the airflow management wasn't confined to parlors and gardens. It existed wherever tea did. You step back outside and follow another small, connet-fed channel that loops behind the property. Here, the wind is less filtered, more raw, but even here, the landscape is shaped to direct it. Rows of low hedges break up harsh gusts. Small stone barriers add turbulence that spins hot air upward and lets cooler air cling to the ground. And then you find something peculiar. A bench made of stone set unusually low to the ground, right next to a vertical slot in the wall. At first, it looks like a broken drain. But when you sit, the trick reveals itself. The slot is connected to a shallow underground qanat draft, and air from deep within the earth spills out right at foot level. It's faint but real, like a breath rising from the soil. You're sitting in one of Persia's most discreet luxuries, the earth breeze seat. These benches were sometimes used by elders, poets, or tea sippers who simply couldn't take the heat anymore. The cooling draft wasn't enough to chill the whole courtyard, but it was enough to chill you one person, one set of ankles, one quiet moment at a time. You glance at the surrounding walls and realize this whole side of the estate is built with thermal zoning in mind. Bright, high-walled sections face the sun and store heat, while shaded side corridors like this one stay cool. Between them, breezeways that shuttle air from hot to cool zones, creating natural pressure differences that move air without machines. It's not high-tech, it's high patience. Here's a delightful fringe fact. Some tea benches had built-in trays carved from marble, designed to hold your cup just above the air shaft. As the cool breeze passed beneath it, the heat of the tea would rise gently, cooling only slightly enough to bring out aroma without dulling flavor. It's like someone invented an aroma equalizer and then left it outside for you to find 400 years later. You sip again. The tea is not as hot as it was before, but it's better now. The breeze has aged it like a good whisper. You can taste the leaves more clearly. The bitterness is softer. The temperature is perfect for pondering, and ponder you do. Because this whole walk through functional zones, the hidden passages, the breeze corridors, the accidental music, the purposeful jars. It reminds you that the magic of Persian wind isn't limited to beauty. It's built into maintenance too, into storage supply work, into the daily rhythm of tea water, fire, and shade. The wind doesn't just cool your tea, it makes it possible in the first place. You step away from the earth breeze bench, still warmed by the quiet genius of it, and head back toward the inner garden. But you take the long route looping around the side of the estate where most visitors never think to go. Here, along a low, ivy-covered wall, you find something unexpected, a tower without a top. It's narrow and hollow, more like a well turned inside out. This is a draft chimney, a vertical shaft, designed not to catch wind like a badger, but to pull air upward from deeper chambers below. Some historians call it a suction chimney, though the locals had a more poetic name, Nafase Kak, the breath of the earth. You peer into its depths. Cool air is rising from below, just enough to lift the fringe of your sleeve. And it's not just air. It smells faintly of stone moisture and something older. This is air that's touched no light in hours, maybe days. It's been shaped by tunnels coaxed through gravel and tile. And now here it is, brushing your wrist like a moth. The shaft is connected to a subterranean chamber, a quiet stone space where temperature stays almost constant year-round. It's down there that food was sometimes stored. And more intriguingly, tea bricks. Pressed dried herbs wrapped in cloth or clay, stored in darkness, and kept cool by air trained to rise slowly through carefully aligned channels. You begin to suspect there's a kind of inverted garden beneath this one, an underworld of shadow and stone and airflow designed not for walking, but for preserving. And once again, wind is the servant. Quirky tidbit of the day, some draft chimneys were known to sing in the right conditions. When the wind outside matched the draw of the air below, the whole shaft could hum like a flute. This wasn't decorative. It was a functional alert, an audible sign that the draft was working correctly. If it fell silent, something in the system needed attention. You walk further past small shuttered windows low in the wall. These were ground-level vents designed to equalize pressure in the deeper chambers. Some were covered in cloth soaked with rosewater or vinegar, early air filters, faintly aromatic and just porous enough to let wind carry a trace of scent into the rooms beyond. You glance up. The sun is still high, but your path remains in shadow. You realize now that the estate isn't just oriented to catch wind, it's oriented against heat. Built to understand where the sun will be at every hour of every season. Thick walls face the south, absorbing the worst of the glare. North-facing rooms get the best ventilation, and every choice of placement height angle, it's all part of a long conversation with heat and wind. Historians still argue whether this level of architectural harmony came from trial and error, or was handed down from some now lost science of wind and water. But here's the truth. You've been feeling in your bones all day, they knew. Even if they couldn't diagram it on a whiteboard, they knew how to live inside heat without letting it consume them. You return to the garden's edge where a long colonnade stretches like a breeze tunnel along the courtyard. Its columns are spaced just so, framing the wind into gentle pulses. Between each pair, a low shelf holds ceramic jars, folded cloths, and wooden trays. Everything here seems placed, not just for use, but for airflow. You stop by one of the columns where a simple copper fan sits mounted to the wall. Not electric manual. Designed to be turned slowly by hand or pulley, just enough to stir air without overwhelming it. You picture an elder sitting nearby, sipping tea, turning the fan with one hand and reaching for dates with the other. Not trying to dominate the wind, just participating in it. And now a fringe detail worthy of its own lullaby in some homes. They suspended cooling curtains, layers of thin cloth, kept damp with river water or rose water at entryways or between rooms. As wind passed through the air would be chilled ever so slightly, and the scent would change depending on the cloth: mint, saffron, sometimes even crushed cucumber. You weren't just cooled, you were seasoned. You move closer to the curtain, swaying now in the archway. It smells faintly of basil and linen. The breeze picks up behind it, and as you pass through, you feel a brief, delicious dip in temperature, like walking through a polite ghost. And suddenly it hits you: the tea you drank earlier, it wasn't served in defiance of the heat. It was designed with it. Every stage, from water collection to steeping to serving to the cup in your hand, was woven into the rhythm of wind and light and shade. This wasn't just hospitality. It was climate as culture. And what a culture it was. One that trained the wind not by force but by invitation. You stand in the colonnade now, watching the breeze move between the trees like a musician tuning a garden. You've spent hours wandering through qanats and courtyards, under mashrabiyas and over buried streams, beside wind catchers and inside tea rooms that never once needed to be plugged in. And yet you've never felt more air-conditioned in your life. You slip through the cooling curtain and return to a familiar part of the garden, though it feels different now. Not because it has changed, but because you have. You walk past the same shallow pools, the same whispering cypresses, but now you hear the rhythm underneath them, the pulse of a system, more intricate than any machine, more patient than any algorithm. Ahead, there's a long, narrow walkway flanked by 2 water channels. The tiles underfoot are worn smooth from centuries of sandals, their faded blues and greens echoing the sky above and the flowing water below. This path isn't just for strolling, it's a thermal transition zone where your body adjusts from open air to shaded space. Like walking through the prelude of a symphony, you're being prepared, cooled, step by step before entering the next moment of stillness. You pause midway, drawn by the sound of wind combing gently through the leaves overhead. And then something else chimes, faint and melodic, dancing on a breeze too soft to even stir your sleeve. You look up. There they are, small bronze bells hanging from the edge of a pavilion awning, just enough to sing when the wind is right. Another gentle reminder: the wind isn't just doing work here, it's making music. You pass into a colonnaded arcade. The columns are stone, each carved with lines that spiral upward, not just decorative, but designed to break up wind flow and distribute it softly. You sit on the edge of the arcade in the shade and sip from a cup refilled by an attendant who never seems to appear or disappear. He's simply always near. The tea is cooler now, the flavor deeper, the bitterness softened. It tastes of dust and sun and the slow patience of buried rivers. Here's a quirky architectural delight. In some historic homes, the columns were deliberately asymmetrical. Not by much a few degrees off, but enough to create micro eddies in the air currents. You didn't feel wind blowing. You felt it wrapping, circling gently around your arms, your ankles, your tea. It's here that you overhear a conversation, 2 elderly men beneath a fig tree, their voices low and warm as they swap stories, not just of their lives, but of the garden itself. One of them gestures toward a wind catcher and says something that makes the other laugh. Even the wind needs a teacher. You smile. You don't know the whole context, but you feel like you've heard that joke before, maybe in a dream. Historians still argue whether these conversations, these oral exchanges, are part of the architectural plan or just a beautiful side effect. Some say Persian design encouraged spontaneous gathering, placing benches near sound channels, building curves that amplified voices, even aligning certain pavilions so that a whisper from one corner could carry to another. Others claim it's coincidence. But when you sit here surrounded by air that listens, it's hard not to believe the space itself was built for stories. And now the afternoon light has shifted. The garden's shadows stretch longer. The breeze, though still steady, carries the cool of evening, not night, not yet, but the promise of it. The tea service has changed slightly now. There are thin wafers of sugared almond pressed into delicate curls. You bite into one, and it melts instantly, like snow on the tongue. You realize with quiet surprise that you're not hot, not thirsty, not tired. You are perfectly calibrated. You walk once more to the edge of a reflecting pool and peer into it. Your face stares back a little flushed, yes, but at ease. The trees sway softly above you, and in the reflection, they seem to bend lower, as if listening to you think. Nearby, a small sheltered niche, cut into a garden wall, contains a low table, a book of poetry, and a single worn cushion. It's not ceremonial, it's personal. This isn't a space for guests. It's for someone who lives here, someone who knows where the air will come from and when. You imagine them sipping tea, leaning back and watching the world change slowly in the soft arms of a trained wind. Here's a fringe historical charm. Some scholars claim that tea was brewed differently depending on where it would be drunk in the garden. In cooler corners, the infusion was lighter, more delicate. In warmer areas, it was steeped stronger, perhaps, to awaken the senses. And in the high summer heat, tea wasn't avoided, it was deepened. Like a friend who speaks more slowly when the room grows loud. You pass beneath an arbor, now the lattice above your head, thick with vines, and the wind that slips through it seems playful young. You remember something a gardener once said in a half-forgotten article. Air doesn't just move, it matures. It's starting to feel true, because the same breeze that rustled the chimes now moves through your sleeves and fingers and thoughts. And you wonder how many generations it's passed through, how many summers it's cooled, how many cups of tea it's circled before circling you. You stop, not because you're lost, but because there's nothing more to seek. You're here, in a garden trained not just to grow, but to breathe, in a house designed not to impress, but to invite the wind in. And for the first time in a long time, you don't just feel the temperature around you, you feel attended to. The garden begins to quiet as the late afternoon settles in like a silk shawl. The breeze softens, shadows lengthen and pool under the trees, and the golden light flutters lazily across the tiled walkways. You find yourself drawn to a quiet corner you hadn't noticed before, a small enclosed pavilion, set apart from the main paths, half hidden behind a low wall and a row of lavender bushes. You duck through an arched entrance and step into what feels like a whisper chamber. This is a Kanye Aramesh, a house of rest. Smaller than the grand tea pavilion, more private than the summer room. This was a retreat within the retreat. Not for ceremony, not even for conversation. This space was designed for one purpose, only personal stillness. The floor is cool stone, the walls thick and rounded. High above, narrow slits let in filtered light and, more importantly, carefully measured air. One wall is fitted with a double mesh screen, behind which a tiny stream of water passes unseen but very much felt. The air that flows through it carries moisture scent and the faintest whisper of movement. You feel it brush your temple like the soft exhale of someone asleep beside you. There's no sound but the wind and the slow tap-tap of a bamboo water clock tucked into the corner. You've seen one before, an ancient Persian timekeeper using drips and gravity. But here, it doesn't seem to mark time. It erases it. You settle onto a floor cushion. The tea service has changed again. Now there's a tiny brass pot narrower than before, and inside tea brewed with dried lime and a sliver of ginger root. It smells earthy and clean. One sip and the warmth spreads not through your throat, but your chest, like the wind and the tea have made some private agreement about how to hold you from the inside. Here's a beautiful fringe fact in gardens like this. Intention was temperature's twin. If you wanted to meditate, the garden gave you stillness. If you wanted to talk, it shaped the acoustics. If you wanted to rest, it cooled you not into numbness, but into receptiveness. The garden didn't push or prod. It responded. Like a host who knew your mood before you spoke. You tilt your head back and listen to the layered soundscape, a distant bird, a leaf tapping the stone in a gust, the rhythm of your own breath syncing with the hush of wind. This is not silence. It's gentle orchestration. Historians still argue whether these rest chambers were designed by architects or evolved naturally from use. Some believe they were later additions shaped by those who spent long summers here and needed a place to not be in charge of anything. Others argue they were always part of the plan, built into the rhythm of the house, like punctuation in poetry. You sip again. The tea is no longer hot, but you don't mind. It's mellowed just like the light, just like the breeze. You glance toward the far wall and notice something subtle but powerful, a curved alcove not large enough to sit in, but perfectly shaped to catch and return sound. You say nothing, but if you were to speak, your words would come back to you soft and filtered, like thoughts echoed in a dream. These were known as listening arches, sometimes placed near meditation spots or beside writing tables. Not for conversation, for reverberation, for the pleasure of hearing your own voice changed by space. Proof that even your thoughts are part of the room now. You breathe in. The wind carries lavender and lime and something older stone dust maybe. The scent of buildings that remember. And slowly your pulse sinks with the rhythm of the room. You're not just sitting in a garden anymore. You're being carried by it. And here's your quirky, wonderful detail. In some homes, the master gardener wasn't just responsible for plants and water. He was also called the wind steward. His job monitor airflow, adjust curtains, trim branches that disrupted key breezeways, repair broken grills, reapply oils to lattice screens, tend the wind the way others might prune roses. It was a position of honor, half engineer, half poet. You think about that now, sitting still as the garden exhales around you. Somewhere centuries ago, someone just like you sat in this very corner, tea in hand, listening to the wind come through the mesh wall, watching the light slide across the stone. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, and they probably thought the same thing. This breeze is personal. You stay like that for a while, unsure how long. Time has puddled around your ankles. Your limbs are slack. Your thoughts, those loud companions, have gone quiet. The garden has done what it was designed to do, not distract you from the heat, but carry you into peace. Eventually you rise, not because you're ready, but because the garden has gently released you. The tea is gone. The wind remains. You step back into the lavender light of the afternoon and close the door behind you. It doesn't latch. That room will be there when you need it again. You smile, because now the wind is part of you too. Evening has begun its descent, and the garden's palette softens into a watercolor of shadows and sighs. You trace your steps along the central path once more, not to leave, but to linger. The garden has taken on a new personality. What was sharp and sunlit now glows gently. Lanterns flicker on iron hooks, casting golden halos across stone and vine. The breeze is slower now, more rhythmic, as if pacing itself for the night. You pause by the main pool. The wind still slides across its surface, but now it's a reflective dancer rippling moonlight instead of sunlight. The sound of water is lower, deeper, as if the fountains are whispering bedtime stories to the stars. And in that hush, something strange happens. You start to hear things beneath the silence, like the clink of porcelain from a nearby pavilion. Someone is brewing night tea, You follow the sound and find a small table set with a different tea entirely. This one lighter, almost golden, with crushed cardamom pods and a twist of dried orange peel. It smells like something you've tasted in a dream. Beside it, a small brazier glows faintly, not to heat the room, but to keep the tea just warm enough to pour slowly and thoughtfully. You take a seat, and the host, silent, smiling, no need for names, pours you a cup. The wind, trained by day, continues its work. It moves across the brazier, through the cup, and into you. The steam dances upward and disappears into the dusk. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. Here's a quiet, lovely fringe fact: in some noble homes, wind reading was considered a legitimate evening pastime. Much like people watch clouds or stargaze today, they would sit and observe how the breeze moved, how it curled around corners, how it sounded passing through trellises, how it carried scent. There were even books with diagrams explaining wind types: the cool step, the sandal breeze, the two-note sigh. You take another sip. The tea is floral but grounded, balanced like everything else. You look around and realize the badgers are still at work. Their mouths open to the stars they pull in the gentlest air. And the walls, still warm from the day, slowly release their heat outward, creating currents that rise, allowing cooler air to settle in the garden's bones. Historians still argue whether this technique, called diurnal thermal inversion, was fully understood or intuitively mastered. Did they map out the heat differentials on papyrus? Or just notice that if you plant vines here and open a door there, you sleep better at night? You finish your tea not with finality, but with gratitude. The breeze agrees. It curls gently against your neck and slips away. You rise, and now your path is lit by small lanterns nestled into the ground like sleepy fireflies. They don't glow bright, just enough to guide your steps. Their flames flicker in sync with the wind, never fighting it, always adapting. And here's your last curious architectural charm of the night. In some gardens, small clay wind diffusers were embedded in walls, not to capture or direct breeze, but to break it gently, so that even the strongest gust became a whisper by the time it reached your sleeping mat. They weren't visible, they weren't celebrated, but they were there like a hand smoothing your hair as you dozed. You pause beneath a fig tree. Its leaves barely move, but when they do, it's like applause from a very sleepy audience. A single ripe fig drops beside you, soft, whole, perfect. The night gives gifts without explanation. The moon is out now, its reflection trembling in the pool like it's laughing quietly at its own joke. You breathe in deeply. The wind has lost none of its memory. It still smells of orange and lavender and earth. But now it carries something more: rest. Because that was the final act of the wind, always to put you down gently at the end of the day. In one final slow loop, you return to your favorite spot. Maybe it's that low bench near the draft vent. Maybe the colonnade near the mashrabia. Maybe it's the small alcove with the echo. Wherever you choose, the garden remembers. You sit, stretch your legs, and close your eyes. And the wind, trained by gardeners, coaxed by water, shaped by clay, and story and silence wraps around your shoulders like a shawl. You do not need to move. You have been moved. Now the garden is fully night. Not just dark, but hushed. The kind of hush that makes your breath sound too loud, your heartbeat too personal. You sit in stillness, the tea long gone, the day folded away like a letter pressed into a drawer. But the breeze still moves, slow, unhurried, steady. It doesn't gust anymore. It glides. A single lantern glows nearby, flickering through a pierced brass shade that scatters light in delicate constellations on the stone walls. And every few moments, the wind stirs that light, warping it, stretching it, softening it. Even the shadows here feel calculated. You're in what the estate called the Gozarga-e-Kab, literally the sleepway. A covered arcade designed for night rest, a few mats, a line of low cushions. And just above, small wooden louvers set into the wall, angled to direct cool air across sleepers without letting insects or wandering glances invade. You lie down. The mat remembers bodies like yours. The breeze arrives on time. This part of the garden wasn't for visitors. It was for those who stayed. Gardeners, elders, scholars. The people who had worked with the wind all day and now let it tuck them in. One final quirky feature to notice: these sleepways were often lined with sound traps, small gaps in the walls filled with smooth stones or crushed brick designed to muffle echo and absorb sharp noises. So a cough wouldn't wake the next sleeper. A turning body wouldn't startle the air. The architecture didn't just cool you, it protected your sleep. Historians still debate whether these designs were truly deliberate or if they emerged from centuries of people just getting it right by trying. But either way, the result was the same: a room that knew how to help you fall asleep. You breathe in, and now the wind is barely a breath, just enough to stir the hairs on your arms, to brush the curve of your cheek, to tell you in no uncertain terms that you're safe to drift. You let your eyes close, and behind your lids you still see the tiled roofs, the flickering chimes, the way water shimmered as it moved beneath orange trees. You hear the scratch of sandals on stone, the slow pop of cooling jars, the sigh of a wind catcher stretching its ribs in the dusk. And in that final thought, before sleep claims you completely, you understand something simple. They didn't just build gardens to train the wind. They built them to remember the wind, so it could remember you too. And now, with the tea long sipped and the day folded away behind soft footsteps and sandalwood shadows, let's slow everything down just a little more. There's nothing left to explore tonight. The wind has done its work. The water has gone quiet. The garden, wide and ancient, cradles itself in moonlight and cradles you too. Your breath comes slower now, matching the rhythm of the night air, cool, gentle, almost shy. Like it doesn't want to disturb the peace it helped create. Every muscle is softer than it was an hour ago. Your fingers rest lightly by your side. Your head settles deeper into the cushion. The quiet feels warmer than silence it feels held. There's no need to keep your eyes open. The images are already with you, tucked gently into the folds of your memory. Orange trees swaying tea cooling beside qanat-fed pools, wind catchers tall as lighthouses turning desert air into lullabies. Let your thoughts trail off now, like footsteps vanishing down a shaded corridor. Let them fade. Let them float. Let them be carried by a breeze that knows where it's going, and that it will always, always find you again. Because in this place, the wind doesn't just pass through. It waits, it listens, it remembers. Sleep well, traveler of the still air. You've earned the quiet, and now with the tea long sipped and the day folded away behind soft footsteps and sandalwood shadows, let's slow everything down just a little more. There's nothing left to explore tonight. The wind has done its work. The water has gone quiet. The garden, wide and ancient, cradles itself in moonlight and cradles you too. You've earned the quiet. And now with the tea long sipped and the day folded away behind soft footsteps and sandalwood shadows, let's slow everything down just a little more. There's nothing left to explore tonight. The wind has done its work. The water has gone quiet. The garden, wide and ancient, cradles itself in moonlight and cradles you too. You've earned the quiet. End of script. Sweet dreams.